Hello, very good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to all participants across the globe from India. I am Rahul Bagadia, Managing Director at P Manifold. We are glad to bring this third webinar topic e-buses operations and monitoring, smart planning, scheduling, and charging. P Manifold is jointly organizing this webinar with GIZ, and we are glad for this discussion today. Very quickly, India has 465 plus electric buses already running on ground on roads, and we have 7,090 electric buses sanctioned under current FAME 2 schemes that will soon start operating in 64 cities. The current observation is like the average utilization of electric buses is quite low in terms of kilometers per day. In some places, it has been observed less than 50% of the expected range operating in a day. This is definitely challenging and points to missing planning and right infrastructure setup. The COVID time has definitely put quite good challenge to the industry, which it will take some time. But let's use this time as an opportunity to improve upon the planning and also improve upon the infrastructure setup. Our speakers, global experts today, will help us understand more levers and elements to consider for planning and monitoring. This is eBus life cycle, starting with roadmap and planning, then follows the technical specification designs, then procurement, followed by operations, repair maintenance, monitoring, and followed by scrapping. In our earlier two webinar series, we have actually looked into details and component submodules of electric buses. In the second one, we looked into case studies, best practices globally around procurement and deployment. And in this particular one, we will actually focus into operations and diving into monitoring and control. These two functions are day-to-day happenings that happens around e-buses, and their efficiency will play a very important role to ensure that we see good utilization and return on investment from e-buses. I request my co-moderator, Ameg, to take this forward.
Thanks, Rahul. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ameg Gopinath, working as a technical expert at GIZ. Hope everyone's keeping healthy and safe. As Rahul mentioned, operations and monitoring plays a key role in achieving operational efficiency, for which state transport undertakings will have to focus on planning, scheduling, charging, and monitoring, which are very essential aspects of e-bus operations. Operations planning, which is basically all the STUs need to incorporate e-buses with legacy systems and process based on which routes are selected. To achieve this route efficiency, the selection of charging location is also very critical. But scheduling on these routes would be based on the battery range and charging efficiency. Charging infrastructure and optimized system plays a very key role in meeting bus schedules. Also, these optimized charging systems help in reducing electricity consumption, rate, and cost. All these can be only achieved by monitoring and controlling our systems through data analytics and monitoring driving behavior. So all these aspects needs to be integrated, and the core of the system is still remains the battery capacity and the range, based on which fleet size is decided for achieving the schedules on the selected roads. Frequency of charging directly depends on how optimized our charging systems are. Location and space also play a very critical role. So this is the overall structure how we would want a city to sort of look into the entire e-bus structure. And to achieve this operational efficiency, it is very important these factors are sort of planned effectively. Hope this gives you a brief background for our session today, which is e-bus operations and monitoring through smart planning, scheduling, and charging. I request you to sort of, so we have a poll coming up in which I would request the audience to respond to this poll. Can we have the poll on the screen, please? Yeah, so I would request the audience to please select your profile from the following categories. To which industry do they belong to? We'll give you 10 to 15 seconds to respond to that question. Yeah. Following to this, we have another question. I would request for the second question to be displayed on the screen. Yeah, so basically, how different is the planning and scheduling of e-buses as compared to the conventional buses now? Do you think it is similar or not? Nothing much has changed, or significantly it has changed a lot? I would request the audience to sort of answer to this question based on the options that we have displayed on the screen. Again, we'll be giving you 15 to 20 seconds to sort of respond to this question. Thanks. Going ahead. Yeah, so for this question, the results clearly mention like there's a significant difference that we have seen from the conventional buses and electric buses. 80% of the respondents have agreed with that, and 20% think not much has changed, and a very minuscule number, which is 3%, which think it is similar. So it clearly mentions how important operation and planning is for the cities to go ahead with electric bus adoption. So going ahead with the session, we have two eminent speakers for the webinar who will be sharing the experience on this topic. Ms. Ronnie Florman, she's the Vice President of Optibus. She has done a law, and she also has a master's degree in business administration from NC. She's also a published author, having multiple years of experience in technology and solutions prior to joining Optibus. So Optibus is basically a high-tech mobility platform providing solutions and to improve mass transit performance. And they have been supporting a lot of countries in this aspect. And our second key speaker is Ms. Sandra Redeka. She holds a bachelor's degree in international business innovation study from Hawk School in Holland. She's currently leading the projects and integrations of smart management tools for electric buses, trucks, and charging stations for various transit agencies globally. The city is leading telematic solution provider globally and market leader in Europe and USA. So now I would request Ms. Ronnie Florman to take the floor and go ahead with the presentation.
Thank you. Let's see when I am showing my screen. Wait just 1 minute. Here you go. Okay, so nice meeting everybody. Today I will be speaking about scheduling electric vehicles and dealing with the mixed fleet. And really the premise of this talk is that as people buy electric vehicles over time, they probably are going to have a use case where they use both ordinary buses and or diesel or gas-based buses and electric buses. And this presents some scheduling challenges. There are more scheduling challenges for an all-electric bus fleet. And I'll try to introduce the thoughts about scheduling in that regard. Let me go on to the next slide. A word or two about Optibus. Optibus is a software as a service company. So our software is provided on the cloud, which does planning and scheduling for mass transportation. It's cloud native. It was built on the cloud. And the main idea behind the software is that planners and schedulers can run many iterations in many scenarios of a service. So how can I best provide a service for an electric bus given a certain timetable? What happens if I change the timetable? And what we see that it does is it saves money. We're talking about a world where the bus scheduling problem is a very, very complex and famous problem in computer science, and you need quite a lot of algorithms to solve it. And also, it usually provides a better environment for drivers because they have better duties and better rosters as a result. And we're able to quickly run many scenarios that way. These are some of our customers, some large multinational operators, as well as companies like Apple or Facebook that really operate a full bus service for their employees. So let's talk about scheduling for 1 minute, and then I'll go into the electric bus examples. So what you see here is actually our scheduling software. So you see here a Gantt for scheduling a bus service, and above that you can see what the costs are, what the crew efficiency is, so how much time of their work the crew is actually driving a bus that is providing service, vehicle efficiency, what the PVR is, and how many duties, how many drivers are required. And the way you do that is you analyze data from various sources. Immediately in the electric bus situation, you require some variation because you need to also analyze data that relates to battery use into when the battery runs out. You enter in step 2 your preferences and constraints, such as I only have an X amount of vehicles. I do not want split shifts for drivers. I would like drivers to drive no more than 8 hours a day. I would like drivers to have breaks. And in the EV sense, again, a special set of preferences and constraints, which we'll look at today, which is bus needs to stop and charge. And really, bus needs to go somewhere to stop and charge. Once you click here on Optimize, you would see an optimal transit plan. And you'd see the key performance indicators. Is it better than the previous plan? Is it saving money? What kind of shift it's providing? And then you play with it till you have a plan or a schedule that you're interested in. And I actually started using this slide before Corona. So I can tell you that the prediction here for 2020 was that in 2020, you're going to see more EV deployments, and that my prediction is that a lot of them will be deployed alongside ordinary buses, creating the problem of mixed fleets. But when I wrote this, I didn't know that perhaps the biggest prediction for 2020 is coronavirus. But hopefully everyone here is safe and sound, and that will be behind us soon. Let me go on to the next slide. So my prediction, as I just told you a minute ago, was that most EV fleets will be mixed, and I'll talk about what that means in a minute. And I want to kind of start with something that's very different than how most people think about e-bus deployment. Most people think about, and they're not wrong necessarily, they think about choosing the right bus, right? Choosing the right bus, choosing the right battery. What is it going to cost? How should they maintain it? Quick charging, slow charging, etc. But the truth is that e-buses introduce a level of complexity that also requires you to begin thinking about the software you use for planning and scheduling and your planning and scheduling practices. Planning and scheduling is very unique. Sometimes we see customers, even in the US, even in California, in a large electric bus deployment, which I'll talk about in a minute, using Excel sheets or using other manual modes, graph paper, etc., to do a bus schedule, a crew schedule, and a vehicle schedule. I'm not talking about the timetable, but if it can work for a small fleet, maybe a sub 40 bus fleet, it can't work or cannot work when you're talking about electric buses. It makes things more complex. Just like Sandra, who will speak after me, will talk about how charging is more complex than just fueling a bus and the new types of software you need there. So while most people focus on the hardware, the batteries, the chargers, etc., the buses themselves, there's a software question here as well, and I'll explore it. There's a poll that I've asked to ask the audience. I'll read the results once it's out. I'd love it if you launch it. What is of most concern regarding electric bus deployments? Are you launching the poll? Yeah. Oh, this is not the right question. Actually, this is not the right poll. You can answer, but this is not the poll I was actually referring to.
Sorry, Ronnie.
No problem.
Yeah, we should continue, Ronnie.
Okay, so if you can remove the poll, and let me just read out the question. So what is of most concern regarding electric bus deployments? The questions I really had here is options, and you can comment on that in the chat, and I'll read out your answers. Is what are you concerned about? Batteries, maintenance, scheduling, etc. There are many things to be concerned about, but I'm going to talk about the software side. Let's go on to the next slide. So electric buses change the scheduling playing field. First of all, the range is different. It's less than diesel buses. There are a lot of opinions about this. Is the range what's promised by the original equipment manufacturer in whatever, I don't know, brochure that comes with the bus, or is it lower? Does it change because of weather? The answer is yes. Does it change depending on whether air conditioning is used, how many people are in the bus, etc.? That makes scheduling more complex. In the previous schedules I showed for diesel buses, the question of the range is not such a big question, and refueling takes very short. Charging requires infrastructure and strategy. You have to place the chargers in the right place and allow charging in the right time. And the penalty if you don't do that is high. You may need more buses or risk running out of power in the middle of bus service, which is a problem. Costs change. Electricity prices change throughout the day. Maybe you need a strategy that favors nighttime charging. And battery behavior changes as well. Batteries don't just discharge linearly, and of course there's this fear that the battery will run out of power. And that really makes the scheduling issue more complex. And I'll talk about scheduling in general for a minute. So scheduling are a huge challenge just with, even without EVs. I was talking about the complexity of what's called the bus scheduling problem. You have to model your bus stops and depot locations, and you have to schedule the right type and capacity. Do drivers want split shifts? Do they not want split shifts? Do you have issues with payment of overtime, requirements to let drivers rest and eat? A lot of other regulatory requirements. And as all these moving parts are optimized, they actually have a very strong bottom line in how many drivers you need, how many buses you need, and really how can you control your operating costs. And also in some countries, at least in a lot of Western countries, it's difficult to hire bus drivers, and you also need to provide them with working conditions that they're okay with. And what I'm saying is that this algorithmic complexity is multiplied by many factors when you introduce electric bus vehicles. If you're interested in our blog, there's actually a more mathematical explanation of that. So when you start looking at EV scheduling, you need to do some trade-offs. What is the minimum battery capacity you're willing to go to? Is it 10%, 15%, 20%? How many recharging events do you want to have? Should the driver have multiple recharging events or just one long one? And how do you time that with the layover? For buses have layovers. Can you kind of make both of them work, have everything perfect, that the minimum battery capacity is achieved at the layover and is recharged then for a short time? And that's really the type of exercise you need to do. And again, the penalty is either having more buses or using diesel miles, saying, okay, I'm going to use these electric buses just for very short runs, I'm afraid, and just using more diesel miles than you had planned originally when making the purchase. Let me take you through a case study of a use agency. It's an electric only agency fairly large deployments in terms of the US. Europe has more electric buses, but this is an American example. About 60 e-buses, all in one depot with 15 routes. You can see here the battery type, the capacity, the discharge rate, the charging rate, and the mileage, which you see actually varies quite a lot, which is maybe an issue, between 150 and 165 miles. And after they've used us, they actually use 90% of the battery most of the time. And they used to do manual scheduling, I believe, with Excel. Now, what happens when you do this manually? Have this mathematical problem of optimally scheduling 60 electric buses. Their schedule did not reflect reality. And I'll show you in a minute what it did is it scheduled buses, but it wasn't able to deal with the question of whether those buses can actually run given their battery characteristics. So what happened was that they scheduled the buses, but at some point the bus just ran out of battery. And at that point, because they were with a fairly small city, they actually called and a replacement bus arrived. Now we all can agree that that is not a good way of running bus service of any type. There's range anxiety, you know, is the battery enough? It's always on your mind. Very inefficient also where they put the charging station. And another thing that they had was two types of chargers. One was fast in layover locations, and one was low energy, mostly overnight, so a slow charge strategy located in the depot. Now let's look at what their life looked like. So this is what we did here is we took their schedule and we just put it into our system. And if you can see here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, each one of those is a trip, right? And what you can see here is that these trips that have the red line around them means that the battery is depleted. And also we have a validation window at the bottom of the software that shows where there's a violation. So it can show you that, for instance, the driver didn't get their brake preference or whatever, and then you correct the schedule. The validation here shows that there's an energy consumption violation. So really all of these messages correspond with these red lines saying, look, you guys are running a service without the enough battery capacity. Let's look at the next slide. So they're running out of battery power. If you hover over any of those trips, so they've hovered here over trip number 7, you can see that the energy, which is here, I can't use my mouse, but you can see the energy here just near the arrow has gone from a battery power of 30% to minus, not to minus, to 14.2%, which is too low. And indeed, you can see that the next trip after that actually has a red line around it. So what can they do? What you do is that there's a place here where you set the preferences, and now the computer has scheduled, or Optibus has scheduled a new type of schedule, which allows charging. Let me just play around with my, I have an issue with my mouse, but that's fine. So what you can see is that there are these long charging events. You can see this black rectangle with this very small lightning sign in it. That's a long charging event. Probably this bus went back to the depot, recharged for a long time. There was a break, and then you see the pull out into the next trip. I'm talking about the 5th line here. And there are quick charging events, which you can see lower, where you can see these smallish rectangles with the lightning, and those signify that that is the layover fast charging I was talking about. And so we really are able to plan for battery levels. You can see now that there are no trips that have that red line around them, and there are no validation messages as well, because every trip in the schedule is has its own charging events. And of course, it also takes into account the trips required to do them, right? So the deadhead trips required to make those happen. So first of all, the schedule reflects the reality of the charging stops. It did not do that before, and therefore it required the buses, and that doesn't make sense. The nicer part about this is that by optimized charging events, you actually take the peak vehicle requirement down from 38% to 32% because you have optimized the trips to the charging events and the charging events themselves, and therefore have reduced the amount of vehicles you need. So, this fear that maybe electric buses require high peak vehicle requirement has abated by planning well. And what next, what I think this customer will do next is look at changing charger location, testing different scenarios. So you can start planning different activities such as, let's think about, for instance, I want to purchase additional buses. This is the route that they're going to run. This is the timetable. Where would I want the chargers to be, given electricity costs and many other elements? How do you deploy a mixed fleet? So where you have several, before this one was an example about a full fleet. How do you deploy a fleet that has both electric vehicles and diesel vehicles? How do you control that? Can you mix them all around? Or would you have to limit the e-buses to just one place? I had a poll about this, but I'll just tell you that we think you can actually mix them within the fleet, at least from the scheduling standpoint. Maybe from the maintenance standpoint, there's a different answer, but you can actually mix them within the fleet. And as I said, originally, a lot of people are mixing electric vehicles, on a step-by-step basis with their diesel fleets, and they're worried about it because there is a risk, right? The risk is that you discover that you need more buses, you discover that there's this level of complexity, and you want to manage to prevent that and to do it gradually and optimally. So how do you manage the gradual entry of electric buses into a fixed bus network? Will you need to manage two complex systems side by side? Do separate scheduling for electric buses, separate scheduling for ordinary buses? And how do you manage your risk? And really know that whatever amount of buses you need, it suffices. And this, I think, I didn't think about it as this type of question, but then I saw a request for proposals from a very large agency in the US, and I read their request and I thought they want to manage their risks. They perceive the move towards electric buses as something that's risky, and they want to understand the parameters of everything, including software, in order to do this well. And then there's the million-dollar question: do electric buses grow PVR? I'll show you what a non-optimal solution would look like. I'm really worried about electric buses. I take my PVR graph. This shows the maximum amount of buses I need at every point of the day. And I only use electric buses for that top area because that's when I'm sure that the buses can charge before and after that peak time. And I'd say they will never run out of battery capacity. Of course, this is a bad solution. It's actually a solution that would grow the peak vehicle requirement. This is just a really short example of looking at what would be better for a given route. So we tried to see whether a short burst charge would work better or a full charge would work better. We didn't know what the results were going to be, and actually the PVR is different between them. And the real answer is, I think there's no perfect answer. You have to model and you have to understand the parameters, and then you'll know what the answer is. It's not that I can argue for short bursts versus full charges, etc. It really depends. So I think for many people, the peak value question, peak vehicle requirement is, does an all EV fleet have a higher requirement than an all diesel fleet? I think the answer is it depends, but with the right analysis, you can probably answer the question. And probably my guess is it's not that different if it's planned well. And can I manage the risks and costs associated with potentially having difficulties implementing an eBus strategy? And the answer is yes, just model it. If you think about the original example I showed, because they did not prepare for it from the software side, they had this crazy situation where the bus would run out of capacity and would call the dispatching and get another bus. But if you work on scheduling, you can actually resolve that problem very easily. Let's look a little at what the software is like for this. So this is what you see here is the preference section in Optibus, where you set the preferences and rules. There's specific preferences for drivers, for depots, for vehicles, and there are also preferences for electric vehicles, mostly looking at battery types, charging profiles, and charging stations. I'll show you a little what this means. So first of all, I've spoken about the fact that this is a new set of scheduling constraints that makes it much more complex. Battery charging is long linear. There are different ranges for buses, for types of buses, for types of chargers, for types of batteries, etc.
Hey, Ronnie, we cannot hear you.
So it would allocate the right vehicle to the right trip. And that in itself creates actually some financial efficiency and solves a lot of work. So, the first question, do you need a separate system for the electric scheduling and for the ordinary scheduling? No, you can do it all with one system and deal with the vehicle types. There are other, I'm actually showing here the roster view, which isn't this is the weekly roster view. That's tied to this. It's another module we have, but another thing you want to think about is, do drivers take their breaks at the same time as charging? That actually is very efficient. You can specify the battery types, their capacity, their discharge rate. We recommend here using the actual experience and not the OEM specs, because in many cases they're not the same, and you should probably use what's real. That's probably something you can get from providers like VeriCity, which will speak after me. And you can also specify a lot of the elements that are related to the chargers. And that's about it. Thank you for letting me present here.
Thank you very much, Ronnie. I think it was definitely very useful. I'm sure if we would have given you more time, you could have actually taken us through more details. Sorry for rushing you. With that, I think we have one quick poll question. And sorry, Ronnie, like the two questions which you wanted to have, we will try to have maybe soon. Okay, so here we go. So I request the audience to please answer this poll. What is of most concern to you regarding a future electric bus deployment? Is it choice of hardware? Is it day-to-day operations, repairing and maintenance, or supporting software systems, which includes planning, scheduling, monitoring, fleet management systems? If we can have the results. Okay,
yes, so I thank you. I wanted to ask this before the presentation because I really think that both day-to-day operations and supporting software systems are very, very important. But I think, this is one of the questions where all answers are correct. It's just very interesting to see what people are focusing on in terms of what concerns them about e-buses.
Sure. So I think the response do bring the importance to operations planning, scheduling. So that is great. Second question, please. If you were to buy several electric buses, how would you combine them in your operations? There are 4 options. Short routes, only so I can ensure better sufficiency. Second, only near charging locations. Third is basically dedicated routes. And fifth is actually mixed fleet between buses, between electric and IC fleet. Can we have the answers? Okay, so I think people have preferred mixed use of electric diesel. I think
Probably,
that is what.
Yeah, it's actually both mixed routes and EV only routes. It's kind of a combination, but it's an interesting answer.
So Sandra, I request you to share your thoughts around monitoring via charging events and how we can make charging smart.
Perfect.
Sandra?
Thank you very much. I will share my screen in a second. Yes, I think you can see it now.
Yes,
perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. Today, I would like to tell you about how charger monitoring and smart charging can support running a healthy and efficient electric bus operation. But before I do that, I would like to introduce ViriCity, provider of telematics tools for electric vehicles and the company that I represent. ViriCity was founded in 2012 with a mission to accelerate the adoption of commercial electric transportation globally. We are based in Amsterdam with offices in the US, in Greenville and LA. Today, with over 3,500 systems connected and over 200 partners, we have about 50% market share in Europe and the USA, which makes us a leading telematics provider in these regions for electric buses. ViriCity started with providing telematics tools for electric buses. However, over time, we started integrating charge stations as well, as we see them as critical assets in electric bus operation. And why is that? Electric bus operation consists of different parts. So typically, public transport operator will first start with planning, so defining the routes and frequency on which electric buses will be driving. Now, based on that, organization will typically decide what type of bus and especially battery is needed to run these vehicles smoothly. And this will directly influence the type of charging infrastructure that will be put in place. So, for instance, you may decide to have small batteries in your vehicles and on-route chargers where bus will top up during the day, or, for instance, really large batteries that will only need to be recharged during the nights, or even a combination of both. Planning, buses, and chargers are intertwined and interdependent. If one of these elements doesn't do its job properly, you will certainly run into issues, and it's critical to your operation to be aware of those issues as soon as they arise. Because of this complexity, it is critical to have a central monitoring system that really communicates with all these different elements and allows rapid decision-making process. So today, I would like to focus on the charge stations and how monitoring and smart charging can help you run your operation smoothly and efficiently. Now, let's start with the charge station monitoring, a tool that helps you visualize your charging data. Why would you monitor a charge station? There are several reasons for it. First of all, chargers are crucial to your operation. They need to always be available at the time when you want to charge the bus, because you, of course, want to utilize your vehicles as much as possible. You don't want them to stand at the depot still, right? At the same time, charging is really time consuming. Therefore, you'll have planning, as Ronnie explained, that will have both charging and driving times in place. But when a charger is faulted, it may cause large delays in your planning. So imagine driver spots charger is faulted only at the time of arrival. It is often already too late to mitigate damage caused to the operational consistency promised to your customers and public transport authority. It's even more difficult to have visibility of performance of on-route chargers, which are often based in remote locations, or depot chargers, especially overnight when there are less staff managing the depots in your facility. You don't want to raise your operational costs even further and send more people to manage chargers during the daily operations or during the night. On the other hand, ideally, you would know that charger is faulted as soon as it happens to have it either fixed or to reroute the bus before it really impacts your entire operation. Telematics systems and monitoring the charge stations are able to give you this information about charge stations and vehicles and provide you those insights at the right time and real time, enabling rapid decision-making process that I mentioned earlier. So how to monitor a charging station? You can connect a charger to the back office via an international standard called Open Charge Point Protocol, OCPP. There are multiple versions of it. The best practice is to use OCPP 1.6 or higher, since 1.6 is already widely adopted in the market, and versions from 1.6 and higher give you the full functionality. This standard basically allows you to create so-called smart charging profiles. This basically means that you can control a charging current, a current that charging station is sending to the bus. So it enables smart charging functionalities, and there is no additional hardware that is needed. Now you may think purchasing charging infrastructure is already costly. I don't want to spend more to purchase software. Let me show you an example of how telematics system can support your return on investment. One of our European customers started with 10 depots and 3 on-route chargers and 10 electric buses. At least once per week, they had issues with the on-route chargers, which resulted in bus not being able to charge, which of course affected its range, and in results, it caused necessity to reroute vehicle or even multiple vehicles. Most of the time, however, a simple reset of the charge station would fix the problem. Around 80% of problems with charge stations not responding can be fixed by simple reset. So normally they would send a mechanic who would spend about 3 hours in total to travel back and forward between the chargers to press the single reset button. This is why they decided to look for a telematics provider, and they came to VeriCity. And thanks to our tools, they were able to reset the charger remotely, which saved them a significant amount of time. Now, with these tools, they also have a full visibility on additional KPIs, such as all occurring faults real time, so they can also react to those real time. They have visibility on their energy usage, so they can compare data from charger and a vehicle to see if there are any irregularities. And they get reports on charger availability and energy consumption, which are very useful for billing disputes. Amount of savings may, of course, be different per country, but estimated saving for this particular customer was around 57,000 euros per year and 100 chargers, thanks to simple reset function. Now, once your chargers are connected to the back office, you can take the next step and apply smart charging. Smart charging became a buzzword in the industry, so before I dive into more details, let me explain for a moment what it actually means. So smart charging is a controlled charging process. It allows to remotely control the amount of current that each charger applies. Just to give you an example, when most of your electric buses gets back to the depot in the evening and they all connect to the charge stations, you will observe a large peak in energy demand at your facility. These peaks in many European countries fall under additional charges. Moreover, to manage these peaks, you are likely to need additional transformers or even a grid upgrade, which are obviously very costly time and money-wise. Smart charging can help shaving those peaks by spreading this charging over a longer period of time. And in Europe, we see that this can save around 500,000 euros in operational costs by simply lowering peaks in energy demands. Smart charging, in our understanding, can be broken down into 3 key areas or stages: load balancing, peak shaving, and manual prioritization, and the most sophisticated smart charging with integrated planning and alternative power sources. I would like to give you insights about all 3 of them. Let's start with the load balancing. Load balancing is a strategy based on balanced distribution of power over a group of chargers. It is essential for multiple chargers at locations with limited power capacity, where limiting those energy peaks and costs of it is of value. Now, to really understand that, let's have a quick look at how charging process actually works. So when your bus connects to the charging station, computers of both will communicate and exchange certain information. The vehicle battery management system will inform the charger about maximum power limit it can take, and it will always, each time, ask the charger to supply this amount of energy during the charging process. And the charge station, if the capacity allows, will always supply the amount the bus is requesting. So the bus is managing is the key in this transaction. Now let's assume your grid has 250 kilowatt capacity, and you have 5 buses. Each of them can handle 100 kilowatt. So what happens when your first bus connects is that it will ask your charge station for 100 kilowatts. Charger would respond and give that bus 100 kilowatt. Then the second bus arrives, same thing happens. It requests 100 kilowatts. The charger responds with 100. But when the third bus arrives, it starts being interesting because your capacity left is only 50 kilowatts. So the charging process of this bus will already be compromised. It will be similar for all the remaining buses as well. In some cases, you may even cause disruptions to your energy grid since your demand is higher than expected. And this is hardly manageable with larger fleets of 100+ vehicles. And moreover, again, the situation leads to costly peaks in demand, which can exceed your grid capacity. Now, load balancing gives you a full control over this process. So it can help you distribute power equally over all types of chargers that you have, but also respecting the maximum grid limit at the same time. Many manufacturers will offer load balancing along with the charge station, their charge stations. However, this can only be applied to charge stations from that very manufacturer. So if in time you will purchase more chargers from other OEMs, you will have several load balancing groups that are not really linked with each other, which is again very hard to manage with larger fleets. Now, it's really worth considering purchasing software coming from an independent party that can work on chargers from any manufacturer, because this is simply more scalable in the long run. I would like to show you a simulation done with one of our US customers, comparing costs with and without load balancing. So first, let's have a look at the case with load balancing. The simulation was done for a US customer with 60 buses and power fixed at 50 and 100 kilowatt. So you can clearly see that buses start arriving to the depot sometime around 6 p.m. And this slowly starts creating peak, which reaches its highest at 3,000 kilowatts around midnight. After that, the peak slowly start decreasing as the buses are being charged, and then around 6 in the morning they will start leaving back to the operations outside. So in the US, peak in demand is charged $20 per kilowatt per month, which results in 60,000 demand charges. This is quite a large number, especially when you look at the case with load balancing, where we applied it on exactly the same fleet with charging power that was varying between 0 and 150 kilowatts. If you look here at the green line, you can clearly see that this charging process is now widely spread over a longer period of time. And this leads to 40% lower peak loads. And that basically means that this customer is able to save about $23,000 per month just by managing their total power demand from the fleet perspective. But what if you had a more complex case with different energy charges during the day and night, and maybe even during the weekends? This takes me to the second stage of smart charging, scheduled peak shaving and manual prioritization. So what it is, it basically allows you to set up different grid limits at different times and schedule those. This helps to remotely optimize the charging schedule and support using lower tariffs during the times when they are simply cheaper. In many countries, using energy during the nighttime or during the certain hours of the weekend is cheaper. And we are currently seeing many European countries starting to apply this model, as it is very likely as well that other countries will follow, since this enables energy distributors to create incentives to use power at times when the demand is lower, and by that balance the total demand over the entire grid. Modern telematics systems, they allow you to set a variety of charging schedules. So your bus will start charging at the scheduled time with chosen power to keep the costs as low as possible. On the other hand, there will be instances where your planning will suddenly change. Smart telematics systems, they allow you to manually override your schedules remotely at any time. Imagine that one of your electric buses in operations had an accident. That happens quite frequently. And you then need to quickly swap it with another bus. You do not want to generate more costs by swapping it with a diesel vehicle, because then you will also have to pay for additional fuel spent. But at the same time, all your electric buses are still charging. The telematics system, it allows you to remotely prioritize one of those buses that you would wish to leave first in the situation to substitute that bus that had an accident. And this way you can redistribute the power that is at this moment supplied to all the other buses to prioritize this particular one. This gives you this additional flexibility and ability to quickly react on unexpected situations. In our experience, most of our customers who already run their fleets for a while, their major expectation is to have a possibility to schedule different peak limits during specific times during the week, weekend, or day or night. But there are also very specific cases. We have a customer in Europe that has 28 slow chargers and 12 fast. So all of them are based at the bus depot because vehicles run very short routes. So after each, they would come back to the depot to fast charge and go back to operation. Then in the evening, then they again go back to the depot, but then intention there is to obviously slow charge to make sure the batteries are being treated well. Now, this customer also has 40 electric buses, which basically means that some of them need to be connected to the fast chargers during the night as well, because there are only 28 slow chargers available. The concern they had was correlated with costs. They did not want to buy additional 12 slow chargers since they already had 40 charge stations in place. They just were different from each other. So they came with this problem to VDCT. With our telematics system on board, they now can use fast chargers with their 350 kilowatts during the day, and then limit the power to, for example, 50 kilowatts during the night. And by that, they can keep their batteries healthy, but also avoid buying more infrastructure than is actually necessary. Still, in case there is suddenly more power needed because something happened, like the accident that I mentioned earlier, they can easily increase it remotely to the level that is needed at that time. Now, scheduled peak shaving and manual prioritization can again bring significant cost savings. We made this simulation looking at one of our customer in Europe with 100 buses who started without any charger telematics. Buses were simply being charged as soon as they arrived at the depot, and you can see it here. It usually happens somewhere around 8 and 9 in the evening. They did not have enough staff to take advantage of cheaper rates during the evening. What we did was enabling them to schedule their charging moment and shift charging times towards the time area, so later in the evening, where these charging rates were cheaper. This way, we also removed the obstacle of involving additional staff to manage the facility and the charging process during the night. From this use case, we concluded that scheduled charging can give around 27% and 225,000 euros of savings on a yearly basis. And this does not yet include savings on the demand charges that I mentioned earlier in regards to load balancing. When both strategies are combined, the total savings can be even bigger. This is the reason why it is worth considering applying tools and software that can enable you to take advantage from those cheaper tariffs. Now, the third and the last element that I would like to mention today is what we see as the industry future standards and the most sophisticated version of smart charging, which is currently under development. It combines both static and dynamic data, such as bus routes, the next day planning, dynamic energy pricing, and this can depend on types of energy available at your depots, such as wind or solar or even battery storage. You will be able to integrate your telematics with vehicle planning and charge your buses with exactly the right amount of energy needed for the day or that particular route. It is not always necessary to charge your bus with 100% of charge. Moreover, these vehicles will always be charged on time using suitable energy resource available at the time. When considering telematics system, make sure your provider is used to integrating data from other IT systems and also grid suppliers. This will enable you to automatically increase or reduce power based on grid stability and available resources. For example, when there's a lot of wind power, you may want to switch to that cheaper source. We also see that more and more customers are experimenting with battery storage and vehicle-to-grid, as these stationary storages help reducing required grid capacity, and this way you can apply automated demand response. These external storages will also need to be managed within your central electric operation to give you entirely optimized charging regime and further cuts on costs and energy usage, and most importantly, full visibility on your demands, energy resources used and lost. Suitable telematics system managing all these different elements is a key to run your system smoothly and optimally, since it's so complex. Now, lastly, I would like to share some best practices on how to procure and manage your electric bus operation. Most of the public transport operators have a planning system to plan routes based on stops and frequency defined by the public transport authority. Now, some of them, we see it more and more, they also will have some kind of operations control system. In EU, it's called ITCS, in North America, CAD-AVL. And some, this is rather rare still, will also have a depot management system to manage allocations of the buses on the parking and also in terms of charging. Now, with your new electric buses, you will add additional systems to provide to monitor the performance of these electric buses and your charge stations. In order to achieve efficiency, you need to make sure that data between these systems are being exchanged. So, for instance, your electric bus monitoring system, it knows your vehicle's state of charge, and your operations control system, it knows where the bus is located and how many stops it still has to make, and how is it based on the schedule. Is it late or is it too early? So by combining these two information, you can anticipate early in time when state of charge is not sufficient to complete specific task or route. This way, you will be informed ahead of time and you will be able to make your decision and, for instance, reroute the bus or recharge it earlier ahead of time. To enable this interoperability, you need to make sure all the systems you use are connected via well-defined APIs, application program interfaces. It is important because you don't want to be stuck with proprietary messages, but also in case you will need to change any of these building blocks, you don't want to remove the entire system. You want this to be flexible. Therefore, it's very important that they are connected in the right way, but they are not entirely dependent on each other. So what we also see is that in recent tenders for charge stations, the monitoring solution is very often defined, but without specific requirements. So your new bus will come with a telematics system from your OEM manufacturer, and you will need to make all these connections with all these different systems that I previously described. Then you will purchase a charging station, and again, your OEM will deliver their own back office. And this again needs to be connected to all these different IT systems, right? So perhaps in a few years, you will decide to again buy new buses and new charge stations, and they will be from a completely new manufacturer because, of course, market is changing. So in the future, you may get a better offer from a completely new manufacturer. So these buses and chargers will again come with their own back office solutions that are OEM specific. This means that you will have 4 different systems in place and 16 different connections and logins to IT systems that your teams are using. This is obviously very hard to manage for your vehicle teams, and it's much easier to have one login with all your vehicles and infrastructure connected in one place. Moreover, having different telematics systems between bus A and B, it can lead to difficulties in data comparison because different systems apply different logic behind their calculations, and this could lead to wrong assumptions in planning and operations teams, which is obviously very dangerous. Our customers with larger fleets and longer experience, they already found that approach with having so many different systems isn't really scalable. And now they require their suppliers to work with open standards to enable this flexibility and scalability of these systems in the future when the fleet grows. I would like to stress a few key factors that are useful to remember in your charger procurement process. First of all, demand your charger OEM to provide you with a charger communicating via minimum OCPP 1.6. And within this communication protocol, make sure that so-called smart charging profiles and status messages are enabled. This will give you flexibility and ability to easily scale your operation and eventually enable smart charging when you actually need it. Make sure that in the future you are allowed to connect independent systems to your vehicles and charge stations, which are not limited to that OEM from whom you're buying it. Make sure this can be done without breaching the warranty terms. It is important to make sure that your telematics is able to connect and monitor all types of vehicles. This is something that Ronnie also mentioned. You will have, most likely, you will have mixed fleet containing diesel vehicles, battery electric, maybe even compressed gas, and all types of different chargers. It is very useful to have all of those connected within one platform. Lastly, make sure your data suppliers are able to integrate with each other and connect other IT systems via API. Additionally, when procuring electric buses, make sure you are not bound by too harsh warranty agreements. Make sure you have access or even ownership of all your vehicle signals, including proprietary messages. FMS, the standard widely used in Europe, is not sufficient for electric buses because it does not provide crucial signals such as state of charge, current and voltage, battery cell temperatures and voltages, and without those, range prediction calculations and other sophisticated calculations such as tracking your battery health are simply impossible. I cannot stress this enough. Make sure these parameters are really specified in your tenders and OEMs will certainly open up. Now, lastly, I would like to share that we at Vericity have combined 8 years of our experience and we created a detailed list of parameters that are needed in order to deploy all the telematics tools that you will need today and in the future. They're grouped per vehicle type, since you will need slightly different type of data from, for example, electric bus and a fuel cell vehicle. And moreover, the list contains, it focuses on all kinds of signals coming from crucial components such as battery or HVAC or charger status. If you would like to get more information and receive the list of parameters, feel free to contact me at s.radecka@vericity.com. Thank you very much for your attention and participation in this webinar. I am handing over to Ahmed. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. Thanks for that brilliant presentation. It just makes very important remarks how important monitoring and smart charging is for our systems to sort of work efficiently. And it also proves how important data analytics and telematics are to sort of absorb all relevant information which are required to sort of achieve operational efficiency. So going ahead, we have another poll coming up. I would request the team to sort of display the question on the screens so that our audience can respond to that. Yeah, so considering kilometers range per charge, what could be the replacement factor of e-buses against conventional buses, which includes diesel and CNG? So the 4 options for this question are: less than 1 electric bus would replace 1 conventional bus, like the equal numbers would be enough, or more than 1 electric bus would be enough to replace 1 conventional bus, or maybe 1.5 times. So these are your options. Would request all the audience to sort of respond to this question. We'll give you 15 to 20 seconds to respond to this question, and we'll immediately display the results of this question. Yeah, so according to the results, it clearly says we cannot go ahead with the current same ratio. We'll have to sort of at least go with the ratio of 1:1 replacement rate, which takes 30%. But then I can see the difference is not much. So 30% goes for more than 1 electric bus would be enough to replace conventional buses. And the second is more than 1.5 times the current conventional bus ratio. Thanks a lot, Ronnie and Sandra, for the 2 presentation. I'm sure the audience got some really important insights from this session. Meanwhile, we'll go ahead and then we'll look. We have few questions from the audience and also some questions from the registration desk that we had received during registration. Rahul, I would request you to go ahead with the questions and share the questions with the speakers. Thanks.
I think my first question is to both of you, Ronnie and Sandra. This has also come from the audience. what phases you have seen your customers actually going for such planning and monitoring software systems? Like, is it usually before the bus procurement, they are well integrated tenders with the buses, chargers, and such monitoring system? Or after the buses are in, they are seeing the implementation, they find difficulties, and then they reach out to you and get this systems done. So if you can share like how is your kind of customers and what is the best practice that you would recommend in terms of a right procurement, keeping in view such software systems. So maybe Ronnie, you can talk about planning and scheduling system first, and then Sandra can share her view.
Yeah, I'll talk from my point of view. Probably the need is to do this as early as possible, really to understand how many buses are required, etc. But in reality, we see people approach us after they had tried to schedule the electric buses with their prior system and had failed. I think what I would recommend really is that buyers ask the original equipment manufacturer selling this to them to have this type of scheduling exercise and get good responses about how this would fit in with their operations post-purchase.
Sure. Thank you, Ronnie. Sandra, what would you suggest?
We see different approaches on the market, and this also has changed over time. So earlier, a few years ago, people will reach out to us when buses were in operation and they started to have some issues. Right now, since the market is maturing, people have some findings already. We see that often telematics systems, they are already written as requirements during the tenders, and the cost of it are sort of part of the vehicle price. So the manufacturer is paying for the telematics for the first couple of years when the warranty applies. From our perspective, it is very useful to have monitoring systems on both vehicles and chargers as soon as possible, simply to get a good understanding of how your routes are like, how much energy is being consumed during different times of the day and a year. And based on this information, you can make better decisions in the future when purchasing more vehicles and allocating those to specific routes.
So between the two options you shared, Sandra, like one, making this as a responsibility of the OEMs, both the e-bus OEM and the chargers OEM, that they provide this telematics and the data ownership and access will be with the transport authority, versus some of the best practice that you mentioned towards the end of your presentation, where you talked about an independent telematics agency so that it can integrate these things between multiple OEMs. So any trends that are strongly emerging in the market, or is it still like via the OEMs route?
Yeah, we see it happening more and more. The customers now, the operators now, they have they realize that putting electric buses in operation is not as easy as with diesel vehicles. So they need some support from telematics systems, and they also know learnings from their colleagues who already have run some tests or even vehicles in operation, and therefore now we see the shift on the market. So people really start requiring the OEMs to provide a possibility of specific telematics system that they have chosen with specific signals and capabilities that are not always part of what OEM can offer. So what happens is we frequently now work with various charge station and bus OEMs and even energy utilities to provide sort of a full complex solution to the operator who doesn't have to worry about this anymore.
Okay, and you mentioned about it interesting in terms of your advices that the data ownership and access for all critical signals should be kept with the transport authority. This is one area where, at least in Indian context, we have seen challenges where the data is not being very transparently shared or made available, neither through any active monitoring nor even after asking, because the range issues is really a big issue. Like as I told in my intro presentation, some of the locations, the operating kilometers or operating range between a full charge is coming almost shorter by 50% than of specified thing. So how do you look upon this access or ownership, like globally for your clients where you are operating? The bus OEMs are providing this data very transparently to the client, to the operator.
Yeah, this is exactly why it's crucial to specify this very early in your process. So when you're tendering for your vehicles, from our experience, customer is always in charge of this process. So of course, OEMs are sometimes refraining from sharing specific data, and this is understandable. However, you as a customer have a purchasing power. So it's a normal behavior. Your suppliers, they want to be with you for extended period of time. So if you specify this as a requirement from the very start, they typically comply with this because they want to be with you for further purchases as well. So they need to give you this kind of flexibility. And indeed, one of the key arguments here is that when you have multiple buses coming from different OEMs, it is very hard to compare the data, even if they are shared by the systems that already come with these vehicles, because the way of calculating and analyzing data will always be different between different systems. So this is, I think, this understanding, I think, is also growing in the market. And again, specifying this very early before you purchase, it's a key. Now, we also have one last thing, one situation when operator realized afterwards that he needed telematics system and they didn't have it at the start. So they managed to convince their manufacturer to enable sharing specific vehicle data with us in that case, because they knew that in a few months from now they will be purchasing another 100 vehicles, which is already a good argument to comply to such requests of the operator.
Okay, interesting.
Thanks, Sandra, and thanks. Yeah. So basically, we have a question from the audience, which is more about, like, since we have different OEMs and we have different manufacturers who provide these buses for state transport undertakings. So how do you what do you think how all these different buses can be integrated onto the charging infrastructure, and how we can optimize the performance and the financial aspect of it? Because basically the charging infrastructure is different for a different bus manufacturer. So how do we integrate this to the system?
Well, the communication standards, so how messages are sent from the vehicle management system, so CAN bus, they are standardized to some extent, right? So in order to run certain calculations, like look at your consumption or predict range, there are few basic signals that you need, and based on that, the calculations are being made. So when you're looking at this from perspective of an external system, it doesn't really matter that these buses are different from each other, because the calculations are being done looking at all of them separately, but also from the fleet perspective. So the logic behind it is always the same. So it doesn't really matter if you have 5 different OEMs on the charge stations and vehicles. Third-party systems usually can connect all of those together, and you will not be noticing these differences anymore.
Yeah, that's very key to all of the situation that we are currently facing, because in India we have around 4 to 5 key manufacturers who are into operations. Ronnie, the next question is to you from the audience. So, looking at the current scheduling pattern, how cities have been taking up. So mostly all this while in India, at least the scheduling was mostly revolving around CNG and diesel buses. But then, what do you think? How important that is for cities to sort of to create a system around electric buses and give more importance to data-based analytical analysis to improve their scheduling patterns, because we still see in India how slowly they have been transforming to this. What is your experience with the other cities that you have been involved in?
Actually, what's interesting is almost everywhere in the world, there's this very interesting combination of places where scheduling is completely manual, so does not use algorithms or software, and having scheduling that is optimized and uses algorithms, like what I have demonstrated. I think it's a matter of cost and change management and adapting to new ways. I think in all places what you see is that it can radically improve costs. So it can reduce something like 5% of costs because it finds efficiencies where humans are not able to do that. It can give better turns to drivers. And most amazingly, if you do this well, it can actually impact on-time performance because you make the schedule and the timetable work much better than they usually do. From what we see,
Ronnie, I think we lost you. We can't hear you. Rahul, I think we have lost Ronnie. She has dropped out, I guess.
I'm back. I'm back now. It looks like I had an issue
Yeah,
with.
no problem. No problem. Please, yes, Ronnie. Please go ahead. Please go ahead with your response.
What I said was that when electric vehicles come into place, the practice of manual scheduling becomes much more difficult, and you should start to think about modern systems. But I have seen manual scheduling all over the world.
As a follow-up to that question, Ronnie, there is another question like India with its first pilots, most of the state transport utility operators, they are having their first pilots with a fleet of, let's say, 50 to 100 electric buses. So the question is like, what is the best way to start with, like a dedicated depot with electric buses only? Or you think with the kind of a technology maturity that is existing, it is better keeping a mixed depot between diesel and electric and having the routes also mixed between electric and diesel? So what is the best way from scheduling perspective and operations perspective you will think about?
I think what I'm saying from scheduling perspective is that if you mix them, you're going to get an optimal result. But there can be other considerations like maintenance, like location of chargers, like training drivers and staff at charging stations that may require you to limit the deployment to certain areas or certain routes. So when I look at the world, I look at it from the narrow viewpoint of scheduling, but I do appreciate that there are other considerations that may require limiting e-buses to a certain place where they're easier to deal with.
Okay, okay. And yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ronnie. So again, like since you touched upon the training part also, there's another question which is around training. So when we actually move towards the solution side, which is based on data analytics and technology, what do you think? How important is it for the STUs, the staff? have they been like being trained by you when the infrastructure for telematics was installed? Because previously all the STUs, the state transport undertakings, were doing it manually, and they were not basically sort of more flexible with the technology side. So have you been also conducting trainings to sort of upskill their knowledge and their technical skills when it comes to handling the software? Were you also conducting this training as part of your work?
I think the question is both to Ronnie as well as Sandra, like how important is training when you deploy the systems?
Training is very important. Scheduling is a craft. It's very complex. It requires a lot of thinking around operational thinking, understanding the system, etc. Even to do manual scheduling requires quite some training. And of course, we pay a lot of attention to that when we onboard a customer.
Yes, it's exactly the same for us. It's crucial to make sure the customer knows how to use the system, since they are quite complex. But also, we put a lot of emphasis on showing our customers and partners how to combine different signals and how to derive certain understandings out of this. And this is not always straightforward if you look at all these different signals. So definitely training is always a big part of the process of implementation of such tools.
Sandra, and there is one question for you. How do you manage optimized battery during congestion? I think you spoke about monitoring via charging, but Vericity also have other solutions of telematics on electric buses. So I think this question from participant is more directed towards that. Like, what are the control mechanisms if a driver of electric bus is kind of stuck in a congestion? How does he optimize, manage his battery? Can there be some kind of guidance from the back end to him, which he can use?
Well, first of all, this really depends on type of vehicle and type of battery that you have. So typically, our customers, they have certain guidelines already mentioned in their warranty terms. So for instance, you should charge your battery within certain temperatures. You need to track voltages in your batteries to not overcharge it, but also for some vehicles, it is really important to balance the cell overnight, so slow charge them for a specific amount of time. So for, I think, about 5 to 6 hours at least. So when you have these requirements, it's often quite hard to know when you're breaching your warranty in this regard. So first thing we do, we allow our customers to set up specific notifications. So it could be information when statistics in your battery, when voltages in your battery are higher than expected, or when a vehicle is being on charge but the temperatures are higher than X amount. So knowing these KPIs that are usually always set by the OEM with the vehicle purchase, you can adapt the system that you have to your specific needs.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
Rahul, maybe like one last question, and then we can sort of conclude the session. I'll leave it to Sandra or Ronnie, like who wants to take this question. So basically, during peak hour and non-peak hour, and I've seen like many cities, they have different operations. There are buses which have inbuilt batteries, and there are buses which have battery swapping options. What do you think? How their performances have been like changing or like fluctuating based on your data analytics or based on the systems that you have installed in various cities?
In terms of battery swapping, we didn't have much experience in this regard. However, from what I've learned from our customers is that this model was not exactly scalable, since different buses have different battery types. So you will need to have an exchange for each of that battery types, right? So again, higher costs, and you may run into a situation when you are not able to swap the battery with the right type when it's needed. So we did not do projects around this topic so far. Right now, I think market is focusing, at least in Europe, more on vehicle-to-grid ideas and managing demands this way.
Okay. So I think like this has been a very, very useful and valuable discussion. I thank our both speakers, Ronnie and Sandra, for their valuable time and presenting with so much of rigor and passion, very good insights. Their global experience would definitely be useful. I do wish and hope that you also find India electric bus industry interesting for you to make an entry here. I thanks to all the participants for staying with us and asking relevant and important questions. And I think like planning, operations planning and scheduling remain a very important area, and it has to be start giving more important attention, systematic thinking using relevant right tools. I think that will really lead to right adoption and integration of buses with the legacy system. While there are areas in charging, including smart charging and leveraging monitoring during charging events and also through eBus telematics that Sandra talked about. Those are very important. Today it is getting all manual logged data, and those data are not really reaching to timely MIS. So I think automatic logging will definitely be a very important area for the industry. So with that, I think thank you once again. I request our participants to share any more questions that you have. Our speakers have kindly agreed to respond to any other remaining questions so that we will do and share with all the participants. Additionally, if you have any other questions for the speakers for us, please feel free to share at this email ID. And we will also be announcing our fourth webinar in this month on 28th May. So we will get back with details on the title for you. So thank you and have a great week ahead and stay safe. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you,
Thank you.
Ameg.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everyone. Thanks for attending the session.
Bye.
Bye.